This is George Galloway for كلمة on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London. Coming to you from London. I'm George Galloway, presenting كلمة where every word is free. Welcome to كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, with an audience of experts and some gifted amateurs like me. Tonight, we're talking about FIFA, the World Cup, about Russia and Qatar. In the wake of the most enormous scandal which has broken around the arrest of 7 of the leaders of FIFA, the governing body of world football, or soccer as they call it in the United States, a matter which is about to become more significant. 7 members meeting in Zurich in Switzerland were arrested by the police and charged subsequently with serious offences of corruption. Now, كلمة translates in English as free words, and that's what we believe in. And everyone here will have their own free words, but I've got mine too. And I'm going to say them even though they're controversial and even though many will possibly disagree with them. My first point is this. If the 2 names in the envelopes that came out of the hat in 2010 had been England and the United States of America for 2018 and 2022, we wouldn't be having this discussion now. Nobody would be under arrest, and FIFA would still be being described as no more than the governing body of one of the greatest, if not the greatest, leisure sporting activities in the world. I'm clear about that. I'm clear that if instead of choosing Russia and Qatar, they had chosen England and the United States of America, there would be no FIFA scandal. And the reason for that is that though FIFA is irredeemably corrupt, though the allocation of the World Cup and other sporting events, like the Olympic Games, for example, are dogged with corrupt practice, they always have been. In fact, this FIFA scandal, rather uncomfortably for some, is already turning up evidence of substantial multi-million-dollar corruption, not just for the World Cup in South Africa, but also involving countries like France and Spain and even the United States itself. Who knows? The last time England held it was in 1966. Largely more innocent times, that's true. But I wouldn't mind betting that there were a few things changing hands in the allocation of the World Cup in 1966 in England. I wouldn't mind betting that all kinds of skullduggery was employed by the English FA in their attempt to get the World Cup in 2018 instead of Russia. In other words, what I'm saying, they're all crooks. FIFA is a governing body of a worldwide sport that brings joy to billions of people, but the people who run it are by and large blazered buffoons, more interested in filling their own stomachs and from time to time their own pockets and their own bank accounts than they are for the beautiful game. They care nothing for the fact that for the vast majority of the billions who follow football, the kind of horse trading that they're involved in is simply unconscionable. Now, we already know that it's gotten close to home. The Irish FA has already admitted that it received €5 million as a backhander for not continuing their protest against the cheating of the French striker Thierry Henry, which put Ireland out of the World Cup. In order to shut their mouths, FIFA stuffed their mouths with rolled up euros, which were then worth even more than they are today. And who knows if the corruption scandal will reach our own shores here in London. So, if you've tuned into this, hoping that I'm going to call for the World Cup to be taken away from Russia or taken away from Qatar, I will not do so. Not least because 2018 is just around the corner. It's already halfway through 2015. And it's blatantly obvious to me that hostility to Russia politically would overshadow any decision being made to take the World Cup away from them. I'll grant you that 2022 in Qatar is a more problematic issue. Sepp Blatter, by the way, who we're told is the criminal-in-chief, didn't vote for Qatar for 2022. He voted for the United States of America. A stroke of luck, as it might turn out for him. But to choose Qatar was a very, very difficult and controversial choice, not least because the World Cup is played in the summer. And the temperature in Qatar in the summer is more than 55 degrees oftentimes. Now, I love playing football, but I couldn't play it in 55 degrees centigrade. And then, of course, there was the issue that this was an Arab and Muslim country in the Persian Gulf, conservative socially. How would they cope with all these drinkers, men and women, homosexuals, people of all kinds that would undoubtedly turn up in their country for the World Cup? I don't know how they would, if they would. I know that they've got plenty of money and they're throwing it at the World Cup in terms of preparation of stadia and changing of the climate even, with gigantic air conditioning schemes which they say would allow the game to be played in their stadia without difficulty. I don't know about that. But I'm not going to support the demand for the withdrawal of the World Cup from Qatar for reasons which will become clearer when we come to the debate with my panel of experts that we've assembled here in London. That was just by way of a taster. I'll be right back. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London and discussing the scandal at FIFA and whether or not Russia and Qatar should have the World Cup taken away from them. I don't agree. It's far too late in any case to take the World Cup away from Russia in 2018, although the English Football Association and English politicians are salivating at the prospect because they want the World Cup here. Indeed, they wanted the World Cup here in the first place in 2018. And if they'd got the World Cup here, they wouldn't be talking about the scandal in FIFA, which is a mafia, an organized crime gang, and always has been. And every World Cup has been allocated on one level or another of impropriety. There are people who didn't want an Arab country to be given the honor of hosting the World Cup. There are people who don't think a Muslim country can or should be allowed to do so. Of course, I can't go along with that. There have been many, many problems associated with the Qatar World Cup. The level of injury and even death amongst the guest workers, mainly from the Indian subcontinent, in the making of the stadia and the other infrastructural projects is indeed scandalously high, though it's not as high as the death rate for the same kind of workers elsewhere in the Arab countries on the Persian Gulf, a point which never seems to make it into the news. More such workers die in countries like Saudi Arabia than have died in Qatar. In fact, 4 times as many die in India in the same age cohort, in the same professions and occupations as have died in Qatar. But I'm against any worker dying. And there has been a recklessness about Qatar's approach to the housing of these guest workers and their safety. And they better, and pretty quickly, attend to it if they're going to continue to hold on to that World Cup. Some people say that Qatar bribed their way to that World Cup. I don't know if they did or they didn't. And if they did, they wouldn't be any different to any other host nation. And I make the point for the second time that Blatter, the criminal-in-chief, we're told, the Don, the head of the mafia, actually voted against Qatar and voted to give the tournament to the United States of America. So that's what we're talking about tonight. Football, international football, Arabs, Muslims, and Russians. What could be better for a debate? Now we are joined, we have the honor to be joined by a former Chief Justice of Pakistan, a very eminent jurist. Who else to go to for the first word but Your Excellency? Thank you very much for joining us. What do you think of this subject?
A masterpiece analysis of the situation. It was indeed very thought-provoking and requires a serious consideration. And I think in this short time, the analysis could not be better than what we have explained.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we've adjudicated that. We can all go home now. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I also want to add that unlike London Olympics 2012, they used at least money to help the deprived area of Stratford. Unlike Qatar, though, it's going to be in the Doha, which already is developed. There's not going to be any better.
I don't think there's any deprived people in Qatar. They're deprived of political rights and the right to choose their own government. They're deprived of the right to influence their government's foreign policy, which is frequently disastrous. But I don't think there's any poor and downtrodden people in Qatar like the East End of London. Although the workers could do with a wage rise, and I hope they'll get one. Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. Does anyone want to speak in opposition to my thesis? If you do, then put 2 hands up, not 1. Let's take the gentleman in the middle, please.
Assalamu alaikum, George. My name's Aqib. You said that you think there's some kind of ulterior motives to the United States and Britain making these sort of allegations on the FIFA and all this corruption scandal coming out now. But there is corruption there. We know there's been corruption there. Don't you think it's about time that it's been taken care of, irrelevant of whether Qatar holds the World Cup or not, or whether it's Russia or not? You know, that might be possible, that might not be. There's no real evidence to suggest that this is the reason that it's happening.
I do indeed. I'm happy that corruption is rooted out anywhere and everywhere. But His Excellency, the former Chief Justice, will know what I mean when I say this. The question of the extraterritoriality of the US jurisdiction is one of the major issues in this story. How can it be that people who are not Americans, who have not committed any crime as alleged on US soil, can be arrested in Switzerland at the behest of the United States police? This is becoming a problem, and not just in the FIFA case, but in many other cases. The United States arrogates to itself the right to be the world's policeman, which would be wrong even in itself, but it's doubly wrong because it's motivated entirely by double standards. I mean, when are the US police going to come here and arrest Tony Blair, for example, for complicity in the crimes in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in the torture chambers at Bagram, at Abu Ghraib, at Guantanamo, on Diego Garcia? Now, would the United States ever come here to arrest Tony Blair for that? Of course, they would not. And as to the laughable statement in this case, made by the Justice Secretary of the United States, that corruption within the US financial system will not be tolerated, I don't know whether to laugh or cry at that. The entire world's economy has been brought to the brink of catastrophe by corruption in the US financial system. What it boils down to is that these crooks were allegedly bribing each other in US dollars. That's not a reason for a grand jury in the United States to be able to bring somebody from Switzerland and put them on trial on a case that, frankly, in front of the public has already been tried. I mean, how does Sepp Blatter get a fair trial anywhere? I doubt it. So I'm in favour of corruption being rooted out in FIFA, in banks, in governments, in militaries, everywhere. But we can't allow this issue to be used as a further validation of supranational juridical power on the part of the United States. We can't allow it to be used to take the World Cup away from Russia because the United States doesn't like Russia. As it happens, I do like Russia. I'm not so friendly with Qatar, but I have noticed that there was an anti-Arab, anti-Muslim strain to the attacks on Qatar as the host of the World Cup right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. Well, look at what they wear. Will they allow people to drink alcohol? Will they allow gay couples to book into hotels together? And of course, I don't want any part in that kind of propaganda. Let's take another contributor who believes that the World Cup should be taken away from Russia and Qatar. Russia or Qatar. And if so, what would be the reasons? Yes, sir.
Hello, hi, George. My name is Aga Abbas. I just had a quick question regarding if Qatar recognizes Israel as a state, and how would they address the issue of Israel actually attending the football match or the fans actually coming over?
Well, Qatar hasn't recognized Israel as a state, but it has got diplomatic presence in Israel, and Israel has diplomatic presence in Qatar. The last time that I was permitted to be there, staying in my very own hotel, was Shimon Peres, at the time the president of Israel. Qatar's foreign policy, as you probably know, is an extremely complex one. It is the host of the biggest United States military base in the entire world. It has semi-secret relations with the Zionist state. Yet at the same time, it's one of the few Arab countries that has in the past, though not now, given substantial support to the Palestinian resistance and even the Lebanese resistance. It's one of the few Arab countries in the Persian Gulf that did try for a time, not so much now, to have decent relations with Iran, not to be part of a cat's paw to provoke and taunt Iran on behalf of the United States. It is the only country in the Persian Gulf that supports the Muslim Brotherhood and opposed the overthrow of the elected president of Egypt. It's not necessary to support the foreign policies or the domestic policies of a country to accept that it can host the World Cup. There have been many, in fact, perhaps the greatest World Cup, though you're far too young to know this. It was in Mexico in 1970, won by Brazil, Pele's last World Cup. Undoubtedly, I think, the best World Cup tournament there has been, and Brazil the best international team there ever was, and at its very, very best in that year. But Mexico was effectively a dictatorship at that time. And 2 years before, when it had hosted the Olympic Games, it had been involved in the shooting of student demonstrators in their hundreds. I think more than 60 died, maybe many more than that. My memory fails me. But that wasn't a reason for taking the World Cup 2 years later away from Mexico. And I wouldn't have supported that it should, because football and bringing huge numbers of foreign visitors to a country like that can have a positive and beneficial effect. And the knowledge that the world is watching oftentimes, usually actually, makes the host government go a bit easier than it had previously been. So in my opinion, there is no case at all, zero case, for taking the World Cup away from Russia, and there's only a very small case for taking it away from Qatar, which is outweighed by all the negative connotations and consequences that would flow from taking it away from Qatar. Much more of this after the break. You're watching Kalima Hurra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing the World Cup, Qatar, Russia, the FIFA corruption scandal, and the role of extraterritoriality in US justice. Is there anywhere that they're not able to go and arrest people? I'm just asking. Actually, we took our cameras out onto the streets of London today to just ask the London public. Watch this.
Do you think that FIFA has really took bribes?
I think so.
I think probably it has, yeah.
Yeah?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so, because Australia should have got the World Cup in, I think it was 2018, so yeah, I think there's something going on there with where the World Cup gets held and that.
It looks like it, from what they've said.
Yeah, I think they have, because even it got revealed on news that apparently South Africa paid, FIFA to host the World Cup, and it's a shame.
So what do you think FIFA should do then?
Get new people in, clear it all out, and get new people in, I think.
I'm not really sure. I think there should be some kind of investigation into it, and then take it from there.
I just think they need to find that perfect leader, someone that everyone respects. I see someone like, if for example Pele, everyone respects Pele as a great ex-footballer. He will be the man I think that can push FIFA and take them forward.
Very interesting views there from the London public. We have members of the public here who are experts in the field, or at least gifted amateurs, like myself. Let's hear from them. Yes, sir. What's your view?
Hi, George. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adi Fatah and I'm a student. I agree with everything that you said so far. And no country deserves to be taken from the World Cup, because football is an international thing, and they should be allowed to host the World Cup. Well, my point is that if they are a Muslim country, when they are, I don't see why they need to get into that mess and everything in the first place. Just play football, and but why do you need to invite all these?
Well, that's right. There was undoubtedly corruption involving a citizen of Qatar who was on the FIFA executive committee and who briefly ran for the presidency of FIFA, and he undoubtedly, I think it's admitted, certainly beyond contradiction, involved corrupt practices in his bid to succeed Sepp Blatter as the president. I've seen no evidence, that doesn't mean there is none, but I've seen no evidence that the regime itself from Qatar was involved in financially bribing anybody. I have seen evidence, though, that the Irish Football Association was bribed by FIFA. I have seen evidence that Spain and France were corruptly exchanging favours with other groups in order to influence the outcome of the result. Go ahead.
Also, Germany were found there was evidence that they bribed into their way of holding the World Cup 2006.
Yes.
I don't know if you.
This goes back at least to '98. I've seen evidence at least to '98, and I've no doubt that '98 wasn't the first time there was ever corruption in the allocation of the World Cup. After all, this allocation is worth billions, billions to whoever gets it. Billions to the corporations, to the construction companies, to the television companies, and many other things. It's usually not that profitable for the public in the country to which it goes. But of course, the prestige that comes from holding the World Cup, or ought to come from holding the World Cup, is very considerable. South Africa, I'm sorry to say, is now becoming embroiled in this whole affair, because there is evidence emerging that South Africa was involved in bribing officials in order to get the support of their federations and confederations when the World Cup was allocated to South Africa. But the World Cup was a huge success in South Africa, and it benefited South Africa a very great deal, including the ordinary people of South Africa. And there were many people who said, can an African country really hold the World Cup? Should an African country be allowed to hold the World Cup? And South Africa gave the answer on both of those counts. Let me take another contributor. Yes, sir. Gentleman next to you.
Hi there, I'm Saad Karim. Well, I must agree with the majority of things that you have said. There are a few things, for argument's sake, I'll
go ahead.
So you say
I like an argument.
So you say that it's good to have an Islamic state or a Muslim state or whatever you want to call Qatar to host the World Cup. But would that be the same thing if it was based on lies and bribes? Whether it's, you know, I know that, you know, FIFA as a corporation is involved in that, whether it's the USA or the UK or Ireland or whoever it is. But having Muslims participate in such bribes in order to bring it into their country, I mean, how would you see that?
Well, it's a very good question. It's certainly true that for religious people to be involved in lies and bribes is worse than for non-religious people to be involved in it, because religious people believe that they'll be judged on the last day and that God will take a view as to how they lived this life and determine their fate in eternity. So it's definitely worse if people who profess to be religious behave in a sinful way. I don't know that they did. If they did, it would be contemptible and would be highly judgeable on the last day, but it would be no different from the allocation of any of the other World Cups. That's my point. You can't say Qatar is going to have the World Cup taken away from it because of lies and bribes, when every World Cup, going back as far as we can get evidence of, was equally tarnished by this. This is all a product of the way in which money and greed has corrupted football, and the way in which football is entirely undemocratic. Although FIFA, as an international organization, is in theory more democratic than any other sporting organization, in the sense that every country has the same weight. Nepal has the same vote as the United States of America or Germany or Britain. And of course, because there are far more countries in the global south, in Asia, in Africa, actually that gives them a controlling vote in FIFA affairs, which many in the northern European sector really don't like. I mean, they dress it up in different codes. They say, well, Nepal doesn't really have football, whereas Germany and Britain, we are, you know, historic centers of football and so on. We should have more say and they should have less. I don't buy that. Of course, the people from those countries that are casting the votes are very often corrupt, and they're not actually speaking for the people of Nepal. I'm giving Nepal as an example. It's a bit unfair. I know nothing about their voting conduct. But the global south, Africa, Asia, and so on, the big powers, the old imperial powers, don't like the fact that this is a big, important international organization that they cannot control. And it's the only one, actually, that they don't control. Fire back.
Well, I just think that, you know, a really important, you know, note to make at this point is that I think it's about time that the Gulf states, including Qatar, okay, were to realize that however close their foreign policies are to be to the West, however close they may think they are to the West, and however much they allow them to buy the houses and, you know, second to Buckingham Palace here, the recent one that they've just bought for 200 million, they're still going to be outsiders to them. And I think for the sake of Arab peace, I think it's about time that they would know, and that's why I'm supporting them being taken away. I mean, the World Cup being taken away from them, so they can just maybe sit back, perhaps maybe, if their conscience allows even, for them to sit back and just say, okay, look, we are outsiders here, let's think of something else. Let's not host, you know, the biggest US army or whatever they have there in Qatar. Let's try and back away from these people because they're really not with us as much as we think they are.
I mean, I agree with every word of that. And indeed, in the days when they spoke to me, before they banned me, I used to make these very same points. That instead of, I forget who it was now. I think it was Walid bin Talal, the Saudi prince. He gave, well, he's the second biggest shareholder in Fox News, which is the most anti-Muslim, anti-Arab television station in the world. But was it him or was it Qatar? I can't recall, who sent a huge check to the New York authorities in the wake of 9/11, and the mayor sent it back. It was £50 million or something to compensate in some way, help compensate in some way the victims of the atrocity that took place there. And the mayor sent it back with contempt. The imperial, northern, white power in the world regards the people of Qatar, however much money they've got, and however much of the skyline they've purchased, and however much they want to pick their pockets, regards them in a very bad way. Because in the end, they are Muslims, they are Arabs, and they resent the fact that these Bedouin are building towers in the sky, even whilst they're profiting from them and maybe even enjoying cavorting in them. So I agree with what you've said, but I don't think that taking the World Cup away from Qatar would make their behaviour better. I think it would make it worse. I think they'd say we've got to try even harder to walk on our hind legs. You see, we had this World Cup in our hands, it's been taken away, and so we'll have to grovel more. We'll have to throw a bit more money around into the wrong hands, into the wrong pockets. So I don't actually think it would achieve the admirable result that you have. I once spoke to a royal from the Gulf. I'll not say from which country or which family. And I tried to persuade him to pay what was a knockdown price, actually, for a very important English newspaper, the Daily Express, which had a Sunday edition, the Sunday Express, and had another daily, the Daily Star. All three of these papers were part of the historic architecture of British cultural life. And they were on sale for £100 million, which was peanuts. And I said to this royal personage, look, it wouldn't be charity, you wouldn't be throwing your money away, you make money from it, you make a profit from it. But you could own an important piece of the opinion-making, opinion-forming, cultural architecture of Britain. They weren't interested in doing that. They'd rather throw it on the casino and waste it. Because without misquoting him, but slightly paraphrasing him, he said that this would be a provocation to the British government, would be a provocation to the Americans if we did this. I said, why is it a provocation to buy a newspaper and allow decent people to write fair and truthful things about the Arabs and about the Muslims? if that's a provocation, you should actually think twice about the kind of friends that you've got. Because if the truth is a provocation, then you really ought to stay away from liars. Very good, though. Thanks very much. A very interesting point. There's more of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, discussing scandal at FIFA in international football. FIFA stands accused of being mafia, not FIFA. And there's a very great deal in those allegations, I'm bound to say. But the hypocrisy of those who now demand that the World Cup be removed from Russia and from Qatar in 2018 and 2022, respectively, is unmasked when you realize that the names that really should have come out of the hat were not Russia and Qatar, but England and the United States. Couldn't get much more obvious than that, in my opinion. Let's take some more audience reaction. Yes, madam?
Assalamu alaikum, George. My name's Tamina, and I disagree with you on the fact that you think Qatar shouldn't be. You think Qatar should be hosting the World Cup of 2022.
Well, now that it's been allocated, I think it would be unjust to take it away.
But the way it's been allocated, it's been through corruption.
Well, I'm saying that, first of all, that's not proved. And secondly, if it was, so was every other World Cup.
Yeah, but isn't it about time that we started to fix things? I think that Qatar shouldn't hold the World Cup of 2022 because if there is corruption involved, let's fix it. Okay, yeah, there have been footballing tournaments, and I'm sure there have been tennis and cricket tournaments as well that have involved corruption as well. But let's put it straight.
Yeah, although if you take it away from Qatar, you're giving it to the United States. Is there no corruption in the United States? The United States is the most corrupt country in the world.
But what's to say that it will go to the United States, though, if it doesn't go to Qatar?
Well, I think the United States is the only runner that has the ability to, in the very short time between now and then, to build the stadia and so on. Of course, there would be a revote, but they have effectively decapitated FIFA, and the American police and justice system has shown that they have very long arms. So the next people who lead FIFA will be rather more afraid of the United States than the last group were. That's my estimation. And I could be wrong, but if I was a gambler, which I'm not, I'd put money on the United States getting it in 2022 if it's taken away from Qatar. They would say that it's only justice. We were cheated. It would have been us if it were not for the corruption of Qatar. Although the fact that it was the American representative, Chuck Blazer, who himself was in receipt of millions of dollars of corruption, would, I think, slightly tarnish that argument.
What's the solution to the problem then? How do we fix this?
Well, the problems start at the national level. The English Football Association, not its chief, Greg Dyke, who is an admirable, estimable person, in my opinion. He proved so at the BBC. He proved so in his comments about Tony Blair, which unfortunately he wouldn't make to me on camera, but he wrote them in a newspaper. He proved that he's a fine man, but the people on his board are as unrepresentative of the football fans as it's possible to imagine. Yes, the gentleman next to you.
I just want to ask about the possibility of the involvement of UEFA in the FIFA scandal, and the fact that they want to maybe try to, as you mentioned, emerge and become the actual
top dogs.
Yeah, main people in charge of world football. Yeah. Would that actually go against global football and making it a global game? Because one of the arguments for Sepp Blatter and the people why they vote for him in the countries in Africa and Asia is because he's actually developed football in these countries, despite the fact that he's been corrupt. So if Europe does control, if UEFA does control FIFA, how will the global game be affected?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I agree with the premise that lies behind it. the truth is that no doubt partly for reasons of corruption, but also for the reasons that you mentioned, the great majority of the countries or the football associations of the countries of the Global South supported Blatter. No doubt he bribed many of them, or if not he, then others bribed many of them. But the truth is the game was spread and multiplied in the Global South under his tenure. And big money was spent on developing football in Africa, in Asia, in the South. And that produced this kind of democracy that I talk about, whereby those countries that would never in any other international fora be able to outvote the rich and powerful North can do so in international football. And I would not myself want to lose that game. Because what would happen if UEFA took charge effectively of world football is that the inherent Eurocentrism that undoubtedly exists would be greatly strengthened. And what we'd have is a global game that was increasingly dictated by the richest and the most northern of the countries involved in it. And that would be a very big step backwards. France is in a difficult situation here. First of all, thanks to Thierry Henry, they corruptly ended up in the World Cup finals, where they performed disastrously, mutinied, practically strung up their manager, and came home in disgrace. So how's that for karma? How's that for nasib? They cheated Ireland, little Ireland, my own old country, in the most brazen, blatant piece of cheating ever captured on television. I've never forgiven Thierry Henry for that, as you can probably hear in my voice.
As you say, it's the referee's fault. He mentioned it.
Well, it's the referee's fault, but what kind of man of his stature, as it was at that time, would do such a thing? What is the value on qualifying for the World Cup by a blatant act of cheating?
Maradona.
And an undeserved... No, Maradona, that was a header. The hand of God, Maradona called it. Mind you, he scored the world's best ever goal just a few minutes later to kind of underscore the point. You can tell I'm Scottish and not English, can't you? France is in difficulty here. France voted for Qatar, as did Spain. And are they now going to resile? Now, the fact that they did was because Qatar got many Asian countries to vote for their interests in a parallel vote, which didn't come off. And that's just the way the cookie crumbled. I don't know if UEFA, if Platini, who was a majestic player, I have no idea what kind of administrator he would be, but if European football, as I know it, were to take control of world football, it would be a big step backwards. Big step backwards for the majority in the world, that's my view. Who else would like? Yes, gentleman behind.
Hi, George. Just a couple of points. Wouldn't it be better if, in future, you allocated the World Cup continent by continent? So the Americas get it one lot of 4 years. The next quarter it goes over to Asia, etc. Wouldn't that be better? And then you wouldn't really have so many of these problems. Secondly, personally, I don't think America should get it anyway. They had it in 1994, and they're not exactly a big footballing country. And finally, as an Englishman, I don't want us to have the World Cup, because if England are ever going to win it again, which is pretty unlikely, but if they do, I'd like to win it on foreign soil, personally. So,
which you've never done, of course.
No, exactly. So that's my point. But I think if
it's
they,
a very good point, and a very noble one.
At the end of the day, it's the World Cup. It should be held in different
That wouldn't
countries.
end the corruption, of course, though, because if you allocated it to the Americas, all the countries in the Americas would want to have it, or most of them, and there'd be the same kind of horse trading, let's call it that, involved in each continent. I think perhaps a fairer way would be just to put the names in an unimpeachable hat. A hat controlled, I don't know, by the Pope. A hat that cannot be questioned. A hat that is under the control of the Swiss guards in the Vatican. I'm only half joking, but only by a purely random selection can you guarantee, I think, that there will be no corruption. So if you wanted your name in the hat, that is to say, if you thought you could host the World Cup, you would deposit it, certainly not in a bank. That would be the last place you would look for honesty and fidelity and integrity. Maybe with the Pope, maybe with someone else that we could mutually agree. The most unimpeachable and unquestioned individual in the world. And I'm volunteering now for that position, and I've got a hat. So there's one solution to how.
And how about also, the condition of having the World Cup is that you guarantee that a certain number of tickets are available to the people in that country, instead of being £50 upwards.
Well, that was a real problem in Brazil just last year, that ordinary Brazilians were priced out of the market. There's no doubt. There are many problems associated with it. Let's take some more contributions. Gentleman at the back.
Can I just start by saying I'm half English, half Irish. I also had professional training as a youth, a schoolboy, and that was at the Forest Ground, where we had the very famous Brian Clough. He should be the head of FIFA if he was alive. Anyway, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, that's my very poor French, basically a federation, an international federation, a football association. And one of the things they're very proud of, that seems to be, as all this is going off about the corruption and everything, is the Handshake for Peace thing. Now, this is done in combination with the Nobel Peace Centre. And it's very significant in football, because football is all about breaking down barriers. It's all about anybody from anywhere, regardless of whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, atheist, homosexual, it doesn't matter. You can be a part of football irrespective of what your own proclivities are. So this Handshake of Peace is in the balance, because the Nobel Peace Centre is saying, because of the corruption, we're not sure as we should be giving this very noble thing to you, this combination of us and the Football Association having this Handshake of Peace. So I really don't give two hoots about Russia or Qatar or who's running it, because as you said, George, they're corrupt. And that is with every regime in the world. If anybody here can tell me a regime in the world that isn't corrupt, I'll give you 50 quid now. Okay? Right. So it's important that the game carries on. I think that's what was coming through with George. It's bigger than all the politics that's around it. The people involved in it, once they get involved in that football, all of this Qatar and Russia thing will be in the background, because the only person that will be in charge for 90 minutes will be the referee, not Russia and not Qatar. The game of football takes you outside of this wide political arena. And it means that you can talk to your kids at tea time about going out to play a game of football with them, whether it be a boy or a girl, whether you be a boy or a girl. Football is now for everyone. I mean, let's be right about it. In Iran, the women are going to the football matches. They never used to, they are now. It's causing a big stir. Well, more power to their elbow. I hope they go there. I hope they go there en masse. And I hope they go to Qatar en masse and enjoy the beautiful game of football. I have to say this because I am an English-Irish person in London at the moment talking about this global phenomenon of football whilst we're all sitting amidst a world in war. Now, you can make the choice. You can either centre your opinions on the war, or you can say to yourself, oh, hang on a bit, like I said to you the other week, George, what about these science projects that involve Arab and Israeli people? You know, what about all these other fantastic things that we do that bring people together? Well, hey, football brings everybody together. It's great. It's the best soap opera in the world. It involves everybody. So my plea is to the people that are watching this programme in the Arab states, when they look at this programme and they see me, an English-Irish person, I want to ask them this. If we are the ordinary people and we have the power to choose, do you want to be on the battlefield or do you want to be on the sports field? Me personally, I want to be on the sports field.
Excellent. A very good point to move on to the next speaker. That was written out, but no less powerful for that. Yes, madam?
You made a good point about if you want to be part of the sports world or the battle world. But there is also something very important about World Cup. It happened last year during a very devastating war, a war in Gaza, which killed thousands of people. So if we want to always put sports and happy events before human life, you know, if we want to always put these events that take the minds of people, and then people will almost become, you know, so much into it. Yeah, I'm happy to be in sports, but not to the fact that we would actually be shifting away from reality, things that bring us together for a better cause, perhaps, which is to save human lives. So, I don't know.
Well, the Romans practiced a policy of bread and circuses to keep the masses occupied whilst their rulers looted the wealth of the empire. Actually, a lot of our people these days can't even count on the bread, but they can count on the circus. And football is a part of that circus. That I understand. But frankly, I would go mad, insane, if there was no football, if there was no music, if there were no movies, if there was no culture. It doesn't divert me from what I know to be more important, but it recharges my batteries to allow me to move forward. More of this after the break. You're watching كلمة with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, but discussing the wonderful world of football, discussing whether Russia and Qatar deserve to host the World Cup or whether it should be taken from them, and discussing what else is corrupt about international football. And not least, what's it got to do with the United States of America and the FBI? Actually, none of the individuals that are accused are Americans. None of the crimes that are alleged took place in America. And how come police officers in Switzerland are at the beck and call of the US justice system? Just asking. Who's next? Yes, madam.
Assalamu alaikum, George. It's me again. My question is the timing at which the officials were arrested at. It just happened to be the time when it was being decided that Israel could no longer participate in the World Cup. Is that a coincidence, or is there some politics behind that?
It's probably a coincidence, but not many people would believe it to be one. It undoubtedly is a peculiar coincidence, let's say. I don't think that FIFA would have taken the so-called Israeli Football Association's rights away, but the fact that it was on the agenda because of the practice of apartheid in what they call Israel was an important step. Of course, that all collapsed when the FIFA Council meeting was smashed, basically, by agents of the FBI.
And my second point is I remember watching the World Cup, the previous World Cup that we've had, and distinctly remember a Palestinian flag from one of the stands. Yeah, we've got the bombing happening at that time as well when Palestine was being bombed, but and we had very little coverage on TV. But then we've got this millions of people watching this football game, and then we've got this Palestinian flag, which I think was a great thing because it would make people question, why is there a Palestinian flag when Palestine isn't even playing the World Cup? What's happening? So even people that are not exposed to that will sit down or Google it or sort of do something, research on why is Palestinian flag there. So I think in that sense, yeah, football was a great thing and it was bringing everybody together.
I agree. In Glasgow, at Celtic, you get arrested for taking a Palestinian flag into the stadium under the government of the Scottish nationalists, who are never done telling us how progressive they are. Who else would like to make a contribution? Yes, the lady at the back.
My name is Sahba. I would like to ask you, actually there is no matter if which country has a World Cup or football match, and it's such an interesting event for many people. It takes like maybe more than 1 hour, about 2 hours, and they can have a fun and enjoy. But the thing is, if they have any other event which can help people to understand the situation for any other countries, is gonna be better. They can understand in the same time how it's gonna be, you know, happening in all over the world, like for Gaza, as she mentioned, and for any other countries, if they have problem or if they are fine and nothing happens.
No, of course, I'm not seeking to minimize the extent to which football is a circus. It undoubtedly is, but men cannot live, nor women, on bread and circuses alone, but they can't live without them. I think that would be my point. We took the cameras out in London today to hear some more vox pops. Let's watch this.
Qatar should host the World Cup in 2022?
I don't think so.
It depends very much on what the investigation throws up. If there's any, I'm not quite sure about that, but I think if the investigation shows there's been some criminality, then it should certainly consider giving up on the World Cup.
Yeah, why not? Qatar's a wonderful place. I think people will have a great experience if they go there as well. So I think, yeah, they should definitely host the World Cup.
No, I think they should look at it. If there's been some bribery going on, I think they should look at it again.
Because why not?
As long as I understand, there is many things that is not all right they are doing. They give extra money to the people of the FIFA, and it's not clear. That's what I'm thinking.
I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to find the people that gave the bribes and took the bribes, and then find out whether or not they're still worthy of it, I suppose.
That's a good question. I reckon maybe a redraw. With the new staff coming in, there should be a redraw actually. Yeah, I think.
Well, that's interesting, as is the point of view of my educated and learned audience here. Who else would like to make a contribution?
I'd just like to pick up on what this woman said here earlier on. I agree. I've got mothers and aunties that weren't 100% on the football thing and would clear out the house when a football match was on. I understand that there will be some people that won't want to engage in it as a sport. But the World Cup is more than just the sport, it's the occasion. It's what it does to bring the country together with other people coming to the country. It's the bonhomie of it all, not just the game. And you alluded to other things, i.e. the arts, music. I often bring up on subjects like this, the sciences. There's great international sciences of all religions and all races. I just feel that these are the things, football, the arts, music, these are the things that will interest your children, will develop them, will make them interesting people, will make them peaceful people probably. Well, and they will go out in the world and be like that.
The slogan is...
So as I see this football thing, it's not so much as this is the one thing that fits it because it's the best one of all of those kind of alternative ideas to war. I'm just saying it's a big contributor to this thing that we can all take part in as people and sort of say to the people at the top, look, this is how we all get on. This is how we do it. And we do it very well.
Good point. All work and no play, madam, leaves Jack a dull boy, as we say. Someone over here? Yes, gentleman at the end.
In regards to America opposing Qatar for having the World Cup, I have friends who work in Doha, and they are working for top architectural and engineering firms, and these happen to be all American companies. The amount of financial gain for America from Qatar is actually quite significant. I am just slightly confused what financial gain America would hold by Qatar not hosting the World Cup.
No, it's a very good point. America wins either way, no doubt about that. If Qatar became richer as a result of the World Cup, they would merely recycle the money through the United States and London anyway. But Qatar is not going to become richer as a result of the World Cup, and I don't think it's any part of their agenda to be so. They want to spend their money. I was going to say wash their money, but they definitely want to spend their money, which they have nothing else to spend it on. I mean, once you've bought 18% of London, what are you going to buy next?
I just personally think it's a power game, and as my learned friend over here mentioned, I think one vital factor of football is it brings communities together, and it's a support. And I think we're kind of using it in the wrong way and fighting our old battle, which has been going on for centuries.
Sure, and I'm not under any illusion. I mean, I think Russia is a pretty strong footballing nation. I don't think that Qatar is. I think they have bid for the World Cup on the same basis they bid for all these other brand making or branding events, to show that they are an Arab country that's different, that is more open than Saudi Arabia, whom they fear with good reason, because Saudi Arabia believes that there should be nothing called Qatar, it should be part of Saudi Arabia. And they want to make themselves as big as possible on the international stage so that no one will mess with them. That leads them into many kinds of messes, contradictory messes like the ones I described earlier. Anyone who's not spoken yet and who would like to, before I bring in our brother for the third time. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yes, I seem to be taking up a bit here, but
no, that's
I do
all right.
like my football.
You're spreading your wings and flying now.
I do like my football. One thing that doesn't seem to have been brought up in this conversation, and it's getting away from the bit that I enjoy, which is the football bit, and we're getting back to the corruption bit here. You mentioned Russia there. Wouldn't it be, with political circumstances as it is between America and Russia at the moment, just very convenient for America to sort of poke the bear?
Oh, I have no doubt at all.
Isn't that really why they're doing this at the moment?
I mean, if Russia's name hadn't been in that envelope for 2018,
yeah, I mean, they want to get back at Russia. This is just one of their opportunities. And if they are doing it, yeah, then they proved that they don't even know how to say football. They keep saying soccer, and they should just keep out of it.
Well said. Well said. Go ahead, sir.
I'm Musa Mahdi, and I'm a student. And I had a change of heart, actually. And I'd like to say there's one thing that causes war in this thing. It's that we're different. And there's one thing that bonds us together, as you said before, is that it's football, right? It bonds us together, brings us together, and it's one thing that we all share, right? So it's one thing that fights war, right? That's what I want to say.
Well, it's a good point. And in the middle of the First World War, or not quite in the middle actually, in the first Christmas of the First World War, men who were massacring each other, as it turned out in their millions, over the course of the First World War, stopped on Christmas Day without the permission of their officers and played football in no man's land between the two trenches.
I believe the Germans won.
The Germans won on a penalty shootout, as they usually do. But my point is, that was a moment of magic. And if it could only have lasted, if the two teams had only said to each other, what are we doing this for? We're just like each other. We even look like each other. Why are we killing each other? Why don't we turn on our officers, disarm them, march back to our capitals and overthrow the kings that sent us here and play football?
Exactly.
Wouldn't that have been a great turn of historical events? Yes, sir.
I'll stick to my point, you see, because looking at it from a perspective where, okay, yeah, fair enough, if it does, like, it conjoin everybody together and it's a football and it's a match, etc. What benefit do we get from following and streaming onto something that is built on corruption? Like, we don't like banks. Not because we don't save our money in banks, not because we don't use banks for mortgages. I work in a bank, so anyway. But because of the way that they're run. And same thing with America, for instance. Not because
let me interrupt you for a second.
Yes, go ahead.
Aren't you making my point? That we don't like banks. We don't usually like bankers, present company accepted, but we have to use them. We do use them. We even work in them, some of us. And the same is true of this World Cup process. We don't like it. We don't like the ethics that underpinned it. We might not even like its destination, but it's the only World Cup we've got, just as these banks are the only banks that we've got. And so we don't really have a choice, do we? Sorry.
Yeah, but there's always, I agree with that, fair enough, you've made a point, but like with all respect, there's always a scope of trying to push and persist to have some change into something. Now, if we were to not like football, for instance, which is, you know, maybe impossible for many, including my brother, but not for me, then, you know, you don't like football, you try and push for a change. It's not that I don't like football because I don't like football or I don't play football, no I do. But it's just because of the corruption that's surrounding it. It makes me not like it as people don't like banks, for instance, because of the corruption surrounding it in general. Now the other point is that if anything was to leak, and if we were to take the contract from, the World Cup contract from anybody, then I think it would be a good time to take it off Qatar because it's self-funding. It's not using special purpose vehicles and investors to invest in it and you know, to try and to buy bonds and the tickets or whatever what they want to do. It's more of it's funding it itself, so there's not going to be any financial damage to it as a country. So,
well, I think you've made the last point of the evening, and you made it powerfully, and it's a point that will probably be widely shared amongst our audience. You spoke your truth, your kalima hurra, and I spoke mine. And I'm ready to defend my point of view as you have been admirably ready to defend yours. At the end of the day, I believe in a single standard. I believe in an approach to events that is consistent and is not based on hypocrisy and whose intentions are good. And I don't believe that this current hue and cry about the World Cups in Russia and Qatar satisfy any of those criteria, which is why I can't be with them. However, I'm very glad that you were with me and that the audience were watching Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television from London. George Galloway, it's been marvellous.